Be seated, please.
So I have the last question.
You want the last question read back?
Yes, I think. It was about Ernest Miller, I know. About Ernest Miller, when he started to look for his.
Did he tell you that Ernest Miller, that's the man that he stabbed, isn't it? And then you said, would you like to look that up because I'm going to ask you several questions.
With respect to Ernest Miller, did you pull out that portion of your file?
Yes.
This morning, there was testimony from Dr. Becker of how confirming that he said before he stabbed him, he had to get some drink. He had to drink some alcohol to bring himself to do it. Did he tell you that? First of all, did he tell you that he stabbed Mr. Miller?
Yes, he did.
All right. Did he tell you what preceded it?
He said that he had drugged the body. Drugged him. He had drugged Mr. Miller.
Then what?
Did he thought that he was too strong or would possibly wake up and that he stabbed him?
But he did not tell you that did you ask him whether he went and got alcohol first, or did he just not discuss that with you?
Let me see if I did. I don't see that I did ask him that.
Alcohol is one of the major ways that people impair their controls. Isn't that so?
It is certainly so.
Widespread, whether it's a control of anger, for an angry person. In your experience, do burglars use it before they go out, knock down their inhibitions with alcohol and go out and pull a job? Have you seen that happen in your experience?
That certainly has happened.
And persons that get involved with carrying out their sexual, not uncommon to take drink and knock down the inhibitions and go out and do something sexual, is it?
At times, people are very well documented that they have done that, yes.
And the way that a person can consciously impair their controls, isn't it?
It can be a way to reduce inhibitions.
And the inhibitions are what rises up to tell you not to do something, right? When you have an inhibition against killing someone, something inside you is saying, don't do it. Am I right? But if you want to fondle their dead body, you don't want to kill them, but you want to play with their dead body. You overcome that inhibition that says, don't do it. You take some alcohol, overcome it, and then you kill them. Take the knife and stab them in the neck. That's one way to overcome inhibitions, isn't it? To take alcohol to do it.
That is one way to overcome inhibitions.
Did he discuss with you the Ronald Flowers incident, the defendant?
Yes, he did.
And that was a gentleman that, again, he met at one of the downtown taverns. Is that correct?
I believe so.
This man couldn't get his car started. Do you recall that? Did he tell you that?
Mm-hmm.
And Mr. Dahmer volunteered that he would jump start for him, didn't he?
Yes.
Did Mr. Dahmer have the resources to somehow get a car to jump start Mr. Flowers' car?
I don't know.
Did you ask him?
No.
But did Flowers indicate, the report on Flowers that you had indicated that that's how Dahmer induced him to go out to Dahmer's house?
Yes.
With the understanding that Dahmer would get a car and jump started.
Yes.
Is that correct? And Mr. Flowers went out to the house with him. Was it a cab, I believe, they drove in out to the house? Is that correct?
I don't recall how they got to the house.
Well, that's important. Mr. Flowers is going to testify. But testify that he got out of the cab a couple of blocks from the Dahmer's house. Did you explore that with the defendant?
He did speak at times about not being let off right at the exact location of his address, yes.
Did you ask him, Mr. Dahmer, in your common sense, why didn't you take the cab right to your house?
Well, I think there's not a question about the fact that he knew it was wrong,
And what was wrong?
what he had planned to do.
Did you recognize that that was part of the scheme, or did that just occur to you later after you had talked to him?
How do you mean?
That he would get out of the cab? Did you realize that he would do that consistently, get out of the cab several blocks from his house?
I don't know that if I knew it consistently, but I think on occasion he mentioned that.
Did you recognize that as a rather cunning pattern to conceal where you were or where you were going?
I think it would conceal it.
And Mr. Flowers, the report says, they got out and walked a block or two to the Dahmer household. Is that correct? And went in, and eventually, suddenly, Mr. Flowers has some coffee, and Mr. Flowers is unconscious. Is that correct?
Okay.
And had Mr. Dahmer prepared the pills before he went out to get Flowers that night?
I don't recall.
Did you ask him?
I don't recall.
This was a somewhat important incident, isn't it, in terms of control? Is it in your mind at all?
I think it follows a pattern.
Mr. Dahmer was going to make a decision that night not to kill Mr. Flowers, wasn't he?
He did not kill Mr. Flowers.
And did he do it? Did he make a decision whether to kill or not to kill? What do you think was in Mr. Dahmer's mind? He had already slayed, he had lured and Doc Stater out there and slayed him at the grandmother's house after he drugged him. He lured Guerrero out there, drugged him and slayed him at the grandmother's house. Why do you think he lured Flowers out there? Did it occur to you, Doctor, what he may have had in mind?
Yes.
What, he's going to kill him, don't you think?
Yes.
He didn't kill him, did he?
No, he didn't.
He made a decision not to kill him. That's the point. Did you recognize that? That he made a decision that night not to kill Mr. Flowers?
I think that something interrupted that plan to kill Mr. Flowers.
The grandmother somehow found out that another man was there, didn't she?
Yes.
And he decided not to kill Mr. Flowers, didn't he?
That interrupted his plan to kill Mr. Flowers.
And he made a decision not to kill him. He got him unconscious, didn't he? There's no question he got Flowers unconscious, didn't he?
Okay.
And he had sex with Flowers. And thereafter, he gave...
We're not getting any responses on the record.
I'm sorry, he's not.
Yeah.
He made a decision not to kill Mr. Flowers.
He did not kill Mr. Flowers.
Doctor, just answer my question. He made a decision not to kill Mr. Flowers, didn't he?
His grandmother seeing the Mr. Flowers interrupted that completion of that fantasy.
Let me put the question again. He made a decision not to kill Mr. Flowers, didn't he?
That interrupted that plan.
Let me put the question again. He made a decision not to kill Mr. Flowers, didn't he?
Did not kill him.
Well, I asked the court to direct the witness.
Or will direct the witness to answer the question if he's able to do so.
I feel that I've answered as well as I can.
You can't answer that. Beyond what you said. Is it because you feel so partisanly favored to the defendant that you
Not
can't
at all.
answer that question?
I think I'm answering what I think happened.
At any rate, Mr. Flowers was not killed. Is that correct?
Yes.
The defendant continued then, did he not? His particular activities. On September 27, 1988, did he lure a young man into his apartment? He had left the grandmother's house and secured an apartment, had he not?
What was the date?
September 27. Actually, it was September 26, 1988. September 26, 1988.
Yes.
young man named FF. We're using that as initials because he was a juvenile. You recall how old he was?
No, I don't.
Why not? You ask him how old he was?
I'm not sure who you're referring to right now.
I'm referring to, I whisper to me. Let's see. You lean over here. Okay. Do you have that, honey? Do you have that?
I am aware of who you're speaking
All
about
right.
now.
On September 26, 1988, he lured a 13-year-old boy into his dwelling near at 808 North 24th Street. Is that correct?
Yes,
Mr. Dahmer did. Told the young man he was going to give him $50 if he would pose for pictures. Is that right?
that's what's stated in his account.
And that's the same story he had given to Doc Stater and Guerrero. The money may have been different, but that's basically the same story. Is that
Yes.
correct? And he lured this young man into his home, making such a promise.
Yes.
He asked the young man to pose, and then he gave the young man a drink, coffee with some cream mixed into it, or Irish cream. Is that correct?
He gave him a drink. Yeah.
And there was pills in that drink, weren't there?
Yes.
And he intended to drug that young man, didn't he?
Yes.
He was to deny that later to different people, but that's what he intended to do, wasn't it? You're satisfied with that?
Yes.
Right. And what happened then? Do you recall?
Yes. He at one point told this young man that he wanted to listen to his belly, and he put his head up to his belly and what I'm assuming was trying to listen to his heart again.
Now, this is sexual overtones to it. Would you recognize it as such?
Sounds like necrophilic overtones.
Sexual, definitely. No question about that. Is that correct?
Well, I think that it's consistent with what the last intended victim said to me.
And in terms of what then transpired was the young man became alarmed, didn't he?
Yes.
And the drug had not yet taken effect. It was almost upon him. Indeed, shortly after he left home, he began to feel sick right away. Is that correct?
I thought that he said he did start to feel something.
Right there in the dwelling.
That's what I recall.
And he got up to leave, did he not?
Yes.
And at that point, beginning to feel sick, he went to the door. Mr. Dahmer said he was going to pay him. Gave him some, the boy remembered getting some money, but never knew what happened to that money. Is that correct?
That I don't recall.
In any event, when Mr. Dahmer, did you ask Mr. Dahmer what he intended when he invited that young man, SS, into his dwelling on September 26, 1988?
He said it was to take photographs.
And did he need the drug to take the photographs?
I wouldn't think that he would.
What did he tell you he intended to do with the young man?
He didn't say anything beyond that.
Did you ask him?
Yes.
What did he say?
I intended to take photographs.
Did you ask him, why didn't you kill the young man?
I know that there was, that this was during the week, and that his fantasy was spending much more time with the victim.
Did you ask him whether he intended to kill him?
He said he did not.
Dr. Berlin, strike that. It was Dr. Berlin. Dr. Berlin said it was his opinion that he intended to kill him. That he intended to kill SS. I'm sorry. That it was Dr. Berlin indicated he believed that on that particular day, the defendant intended to kill that young man.
Okay.
Did you believe that? What is your opinion?
I think he did.
And
I think he got stimulated by the young man. And then I think that's what interrupted it was that he realized that he couldn't complete what he wanted to do.
And he wanted to kill him and decided not to kill him. Is that what happened?
Something interrupted it.
The young man got up to leave. Is that what you mean?
No, because I think that he could have overpowered him. He let him go.
I think he could have overpowered him too. He decided to let him go. Is that correct?
He let him go.
He gave him drugs, started down the path, and then pulled back.
That's correct.
Did you ask him why he pulled back?
I believe it was because he had to go to work.
And do you believe that's why he stopped himself from killing the young man, because he thought, hey, I got to go to work tonight?
I think that he was stimulated by the young man and went into a pattern that had become repetitive and compelling, and that something interrupted that pattern. And I think that it was that he had to be at work.
He decided, I've got to be to work, and decided to exercise control and to get to work rather than getting the sexual pleasure. He decided, gee, I got to get to work, and I'll stop it and let him go. Is that safely how he described the decision he made, in your opinion?
I would need to review exactly what he said.
Did you, for a person who is, you've indicated psychosis, you thought he was suffering from psychosis.
That's correct.
Would the pressure of a sentencing for, he was eventually brought before the court on May 23, 1989 to be sentenced, was he not?
Sentenced on 5/23/89?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Did you ever read that sentencing transcript?
I can't recall.
I want to read it to you. He's facing 20 years on 2 counts. I think you saw the complaint. It's enticing because he lured the boy off the street, and a second count because he touched the boy. So he's facing 20 years, which I think would be an extremely stressful experience for an individual. Would you think so?
Yes.
He'd already been convicted on the indecent exposure, which was reduced to disorderly conduct. Now he's facing 20 years. Are you aware that the probation department was recommending that he be sentenced to heavy time? Were you aware of that?
I did read the pre-sentence investigation.
And the pre-sentence investigation calls, as I recall, for substantial time, does it not?
I could check that. I know it says a lot of things.
Okay, but basically, in terms of the conclusion, what they're recommending imprisonment, were they not?
They had also consulted with some mental health experts, specifically Dr. Rosen again, who said that this was a very sick individual who needed hospitalization.
Right. Dr. Rosen also said he was not psychotic. Isn't that accurate? Dr. Rosen has never said he was psychotic, did she?
She felt he was ill enough that he needed to be in the hospital.
And she said he wouldn't cooperate, that he would not cooperate. Isn't that true?
She said that at an earlier time that she did not feel that he had benefited.
Right, because did she describe, you read her notes, he came in and actually sat in the room and turned his back to her when she was trying to help him. That's what he did, didn't he? She actually saw him several times before the Tuomi death, didn't she? She saw him in October and November before the Tuomi death, did she not?
Yes.
Do you think, does a man have any responsibility that says he's being troubled by fantasies of killing someone, and he is referred by a court to a psychologist? Does he have any obligation to say, look, I'm getting these fantasies. I need some help because I'm thinking about killing somebody. Do you think he has any obligation to do that?
I think that would have been a good time to do it.
But you know he chose not to do that.
I know he didn't do it.
Let me read from the sentencing. Now, this is a man that I think you believe is psychotic. I'd like to read. Tell me if you see any evidence of psychosis from this. The court is talking to him. Asked if he wants would you like to make a statement, Mr. Dahmer, about yourself or about the sentencing? They talk about, it says he's an alcoholic and that he had been in the military. Goes on to say the following. The prosecution has raised very serious charges against me, and I can understand why. What I've done is very serious. I never I never meant to give anyone the impression that I thought otherwise. I've never been in this position before. Nothing this awful. This is a nightmare come true for me. If anything would shock me out of my past behavior patterns, it's this. The one thing I have in my mind that is stable and that gives me some source of pride is my job. I've come very close to losing it because of my actions, which I take full responsibility for. I'm the one to blame for all of this. What I've done has cut both ways. It's hurt the victim and it's hurt me. It's a no-win situation. All I can do is beg you, please spare my job. Please give me a chance to show that I can tread the straight and narrow and not get involved in any situation like this ever again. I would not only ask, I beg you, please don't destroy my life. I know I deserve a great deal of punishment. I'm not trying to elicit your sympathy, but I would ask you, please, don't wipe me out completely. And then did he go on in that to say, about the court asked about adult male's relationship. I have had in the past, not recently. This enticing a child was the climax of my idiocy. It's going to destroy me, I'm afraid. This one incident. I don't know what in the world I was thinking when I did it. I know I was under the influence. Listen carefully to this. As far as purposely drugging him, that was never my intention. I've been taking sleeping pills because I worked the third shift for several years now. I take quite a few of them because I built up a tolerance to them, and it was never my intention to purposely drug him. I wouldn't have offered him money if I had planned on drugging him, but nevertheless, I'm not trying to excuse what I did. Does that sound like a psychotic person talking?
A person who's psychotic may at any time sound very rational.
From what you read there, from what I read to you, does that sound like a psychotic person?
If he wrote it, in fact, then it sounds like there's a coherent logic to it, a pleading to get out.
And it's in response to questions by the judge.
Yes.
That was rather manipulative bunch of lies, wasn't it? He intentionally drugged him. There's no doubt in your mind about that, is there?
No.
Then followed a period of almost a year to the next death. Is that correct? It was 3 days short of a year till the next slaying. Am I right?
That's correct.
Pardon?
Yes.
During that time, the defendant spent about some 9 months or so in the House of Correction on work release. Do you know what work release means?
Yes, I do.
The House of Correction, the portion he attended is kitty corner from here. He worked at a place 4 or 5 blocks east of the House of Correction.
Okay.
Was released on holidays occasionally.
With all due respect,
Yeah.
I don't think that's an accurate statement on holidays, on occasions. I think if the question is going to be asked, it's got to be more specific.
I think,
On holidays,
isn't the record that he was released on Thanksgiving?
one holiday, not holidays on occasion.
Was he released on a daily basis, 5 days a week at least, basically, during that time? Was your
That was
understanding?
my understanding, to go to work. Yes.
And for a period of 3 days short of a year, he was about 9 months on that probation. He then wrote the judge and got released early, didn't he? You aware of that?
Yes.
And he was released early, didn't serve a full year, served about 9 months of time. And during the interval from roughly the March or so when he was released to May 20th, 90, he was not under any controls other than reporting to a probation officer. Are you aware of that?
Yes.
For that period of that year, while he was being released daily, 5 days a week, and then the 3-month period after full release, he did not kill anyone, did he?
What period of time was that?
I'm talking from the time of the sentencing, May 23, 1989.
Uh-huh.
In terms of actual death, it went from March 25, 1989, when he killed Mr. Sears, March 25, 1989, until May 20th, 1990. He killed no one in that interval, am I right?
Yes.
So that is actually about roughly 14 months, a little over 14 months. That'd be right?
Yes.
In that 14-month interval, he killed no one. He exercised, did the fantasies continue as far as you know?
Yes.
And he exercised control and conformed to the law during that time, did he not?
Yes, he did.
He had a number of meetings with his probationary officer, and various help was offered him during that time. Is that accurate?
Yes, and he took advantage of some of that help.
He went to DePaul, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
And he did not cooperate. He went, attended the meetings, but continued to drink on the weekends. Would that be an accurate summary of what he was doing?
I think it's a distortion to say he did not cooperate. He was discharged as improved from DePaul.
But do you
All
think...
his drug screens, with the exception of 1 or 2, were completely clean. I believe there were no alcohol, and there was 1 benzodiazepine, which he said he took as a sleeping pill in that whole period of time.
All right. And do you know what days of the week he was going to DePaul?
I imagine I could find that out.
You're a doctor, and you know how quickly alcohol passes out of the blood. Tell the jury how soon alcohol would pass out of the blood.
It would depend how much you would drink.
Right. Well, give an approximation. Say you had a good snortful on a Saturday night.
What is a good snortful to you?
Well, plenty to drink, enough to feel happy. You tested on a Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday. Would it vary what the day it was? You got snockered on Saturday night?
I don't think there'd be no question. Tuesday would not show anything, and Monday would probably not either.
So alcohol passes out of the system rather rapidly, doesn't it? The fact that he might be drinking on the weekends and attending meetings on Saturday nights and even going there and being tested on Monday or Tuesday would not show the alcohol, would it? I refer you then to July 8th of 1990. On that particular incident, he invited a juvenile named LP, 15 years of age, to his dwelling. Is that correct?
LB?
LP. It was July 8, 1990. He's another juvenile. He's age 15. You want me to give you the name?
Mm-hmm.
He invited a juvenile age 15. He met him in front of was it the 219 Club, and invited him back to his dwelling. Is that correct?
That sounds right.
And they went there by cab to the area at least, and then went into the apartment. Is that true?
As I recall.
And the defendant had made some plans. He couldn't get drugs for this particular event, and he made another alternative plan, did he not?
Yes.
And what was that plan?
I believe it was to hit him on the head.
And hit who he brought back that night on the head with a mallet?
With a mallet, yes.
And after he asked this young man to pose for some pictures, then asked the young man to turn over on his back.
Yes.
And the young man had indicated he felt it was about time to leave. And he asked him, well, a few more pictures, will you turn over on your back? Would that be an accurate capitalization of what happened?
It sounds right.
And then he struck the young man on the back, or on the neck, as I recall, but did not render him unconscious. And the young man turned, and there was a confrontation, struggle perhaps. But in any event, he did not slay him at that point. Is that correct?
That's correct.
There's some dispute, and the young man left the home, did he not?
Yes.
Left the apartment? Do you believe Mr. Dahmer had intended to slay this young man?
It sounded like that pattern.
And the young man then came back, didn't he? He left saying he was going to call the police. Mr. Dahmer didn't stop him. And then he came back.
He did come back.
Then Mr. Dahmer tried to strangle him when he came back, didn't he?
Yes.
Eventually that came to a halt, and they spent some time talking about things. And eventually then Mr. Dahmer walked him to a cab at 7 a.m. in the morning or so. Is that about right? Is that according to your recollection?
As best I can recall.
Mr. Dahmer obviously made a decision not to kill that young man, didn't he?
Yes, he did. He did not kill him.
Did you ask him why he didn't kill him? Feel free to refer to your notes.
Okay. I think that would be. Yes, I did find that section. it sounds like that he felt it had gotten too loud in the apartment with the struggle, and that he left with him and got him a cab outside.
In other words, although apparently the way he told it to you, and you haven't gone over the detail, why don't you tell us how he told it to you, what happened, that particular incident, how he reported it to you?
That this was he agreed to go home with him for sex. It was about 12 noon. He had gotten a mallet. He said that he had taken him back to get pictures. While in the course of taking pictures, he hit him on the back of the head. There was some struggle. He left and came back. He wanted
The
money.
boy left and came back, is that right? The boy left and came back.
Louis Panay left and came back. He wanted money. That's when they struggled again on the dining room floor. I think what's here is that he had knocked him down, but that in the course of these events, the noise of the struggle got too loud and that he stopped.
Mr. Dahmer stopped himself at that point.
That interrupted what he had planned to do.
He is really full bore apparently into killing this man. Got his hands around his neck and is attempting to kill him. The struggle gets too loud and he says, I might get caught here, and pulls back. Would that be makes a decision not to proceed?
That's what it looks like from these notes.
Would you look to, you indicated on the list of things that you relied upon, one of the points was that you, in your cited materials, was the police report of September 24, I think, or 25 or 26, 1990. You see that?
September 26, 1990.
Yes.
Do you have a copy of that?
I'm looking at your report. I think that's one of the things you listed that you read in
I
preparation.
can look for it.
Under 18, item 18 on your report.
Yes.
Do you have that in front of you?
Not right in front of me. I can look for it.
Would you get it? It's well. Why don't I just give you a now?
Fine.
I think you're right. You have before you the police report. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that is a complaint given by Mr. Dahmer to the police. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And what date does he claim he was robbed?
$924.90.
And what complaint does he make? What happened? Would you describe the men that robbed him?
He said that he was approached by two black males. Suspect number one told Dahmer that he and his cohort were down on their luck and needed money. Dahmer said he didn't have any to give them, and suspect number one stated, "You look like you got money. Take your wallet out or we'll pound your ass." Dahmer again refused. Suspect number one then shouted, "I got a gun. I should just shoot you." As he reached into a back pocket, Dahmer said he thought the suspect number one was reaching for a gun in his back pocket and was scared. Suspect number one then went into Dahmer's pockets, removed two $1 bills from his wallet and $3 in coins from his front pocket. Then suspects 1 and 2 fled on foot.
Mr. Dahmer reported that to police officer Matika. Is that correct?
Police officer what?
Matika. Matika. The name of the officer?
Yeah,
To whom that was reported. Did you cited that report? Did you lend, is that for a particular reason that you cited that report?
It was part of the discovery. I cited it only insofar as that he was a victim of a street crime.
Right. And that was, you cited that report from what would be safe to say, I assume you read many hundreds of police reports.
I think thousands.
Right. Pages.
Yeah, thousands of pages, yes.
And you pulled that out. Did you give that some credence or some weight to that?
It didn't really influence my opinions, no.
Did you believe it, that he had been a victim of a street crime?
I had no reason not to believe it.
Did you appreciate that he had killed a man either that day or the day before, one David Thomas? Did that occur to you?
I don't have the date of David Thomas's death in front of me.
Do you have a list there of the dates of the deaths?
I have a 1090, but I don't have the actual date.
Do your records reflect that it was on either Sunday, September 23, 1990, or a Monday, September 24, 1990?
Let me check my records. It's there's some imprecision as to the date, as to whether it's October or November in my notes.
No, sir, I'm talking of September, David Thomas.
Yes. The date of victim's death I have is 1090 in the notes that I have.
Just a very general date like
Yes.
that. All right, let me. Would you like this? I asked you to examine what has been marked in State Exhibit number 33 and State Exhibit number 34. I am not sure. Were you provided with the DePaul Hospital records?
I do have the DePaul Hospital records.
That State Exhibit is from that date, from the DePaul records. And you know, you can start right at the top line. You read the date in the jury?
9/18/90.
No, the 9/25.
Oh, the next week. 1-to-1 session, no show or call.
And that is the David Dahmer record you can see at the end point of David Dahmer.
Yes.
On that particular day, 125, 1990, Paul, maybe had no go. Right?
That's correct.
Would you notice on 9/26, now, you have shown me now probation office records. I do not know if you saw those records. That was a short. Right, if you look at that, and particularly look at the entry on September 26, 1990, reflect the call from Mr. Dahmer to his probation officer Dahmer.
The call is to Donna Chesney.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Coley particularly, he reports that when he got the police robbery, yes, but to the police, he says he lost $5 and they took it to Donna Chester, he says he lost $10.
$10 and a bus.
Did he not?
Yes, he did.
Right. And in terms of the record reflects in the charging document, I think, indicates that the death of Mr. Thomas took place on September 24th or September 25th, 1990. September 23rd or September 24, 1990. This was the same time as that alleged street robbery. Is that true?
Well, in one case, it would be a day earlier. In one case, it would be the day.
Now, there's an inconsistent report from what he told the police about the amount taken and what was taken and what he told his probation officer. Is that correct?
There's a $5 difference. And a bus pass.
And a bus pass. And in terms of with respect to the description of one of the robbers as being a 55-year-old man, that's a somewhat exceptional to have a 55-year-old man engaging in street robberies. Would you say in your experience, can't rule it out, but somewhat exceptional?
Anything's possible, but it's not as common as a younger man.
Do you have any opinion as to whether or not that street robbery actually took place or was a fabricated report? Do you have any opinion? The reason I call it to your attention is because it's one of the items you specifically pulled out to rely on.
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, a reason I refer to it so intensively is that of many hundreds of pages, it's one of those that you pull out and cite as something you relied on. That police.
Well, it's something that I reviewed.
Well, you reviewed hundreds of pages that you didn't list. You pulled out specifically a number, item 18, police report with defendant as victim of a strong arm robbery dated 9/26/90.
Yes.
And I'm going to object from the question because he didn't say rely on it. He said he reviewed it.
Did you rely at all on it for any meaning or any purpose at all?
I didn't rely on it in forming my opinions. I reviewed it, though.
In terms of the death of Mr. Tony Hughes, reports submitted initially to the police indicate or strike that. Let's go particularly to David Thomas, the same gentleman we're talking about. Reports submitted to the police, twice the defendant after his arrest said that he did not have sex with David Thomas at any time. Were you aware of that?
That he said he did not.
Yes. Right. Then he later told you that he did. Is that what happened?
He said that he had had sex with all of the victims.
After death?
I would have to look at my notes again.
Let me ask this, doctor, and is it important to you whether or not he had sex, anal sex, fellatio, rubbing after death? Is that important
Well,
to you?
it's important insofar as that is the the sexual disorder, the primary sexual disorder is necrophilia.
But counsel.
He does.
Well,
Sure, go ahead.
Go ahead.
He does say that he did have. He does say that he did have sex after death.
In terms of the various reports, you were submitted something prepared in part by counsel going over police reports and apparently prepared in part by counsel. Is that true?
That's correct.
And you have that in front of you right now.
That's correct.
And you relied on that when you questioned the defendant, did you not?
I utilized that in questioning him.
Right. Did you realize that part of it had been prepared by counsel?
Absolutely.
And do you appreciate that counsel is under a zealous, is required by oath to zealously labor on behalf of the defendant?
Absolutely.
And you appreciate it as having studied psychology and psychiatry, that inevitably even a conscientious attorney is inevitably going to filter through what tends to support the insanity defense and filter out what tends to militate against it.
That
If
could.
it's a hypothetical, I'll object to it.
Would that be psychologically generally the case?
Go ahead and
Is there an
answer.
objection?
Do you think that would be psychologically generally the case?
I think that I had to make a determination by asking him whether those statements that had been added were accurate or not.
And did you ask him?
Yes,
And were they did he say they were
he
accurate?
said they were.
And those statements indicate that at least with 4 of the defendants, he did not have sex after death with them. Would that be accurate? I mean, I'm relying now on what you put together from the police reports and what counsel had prepared. Those documents, what counsel submitted to you, submitted a copy to me, indicate that in 4 of the cases, 4 of these defendants, he did not have sex after death with them.
I'm for the defendants, obviously.
4 of the victims.
I would have to review exactly which ones those were.
Right? I believe Mr. Hughes is one, Mr. Weinberger is another. Mr. Bredehoff, the last one, was the third. Would you check Hughes first? The Hughes report. The 4th person would be Turner. Let's start with Hughes.
I'd like to check my notes, personal notes on Hughes as well.
Does the report submitted by counsel indicate that there was not sex with Hughes after death?
It doesn't indicate anything, as far as I can see.
The copy I have, sir, reads as follows. Sex after death. No, JD drank too much. After victim died, JD laid him down in bedroom floor for 3 days. Do you have that? This is with respect to Mr. Tony Anthony Hughes. Victim number 12.
I do see where you're reading from. I'd also like to see what he said in my personal notes.
Well, that's fine. Take your time. Find out.
The only additional note I had made there is in regard to the drilling of the hole in his head.
So as far as we know, he did not have sex with anal or oral sex with Tony Hughes after he killed him. Would that be correct?
As far as we know.
All right. Would you turn to your notes then with respect to Mr. Montrell? He's also known as Matt Turner.
Okay.
Matt Turner, also known as Donald Montrell.
He does indicate to me that he did have sex with the body.
Speak up, please, Doc.
He does say to me that he has sex with the body, that he cuts open the body, cuts the belly open, sees the inside, the appearance, the intestines, different colors, red, blue, yellow. It's surprising to see how many colors there were in the internal organs.
And then have sex?
Would get sexually excited. On a 1 to 10 scale, he said that this started at, he indicated that that happened with victim number 14.
My question is, if the report submitted to you by counsel indicates, and that presumably is after counsel interviewed him, this is after the police interviewed him, after counsel interviewed him, the report we received says sex after death, no, just took pictures of victim as victim didn't appeal to him. Is that what the report submitted to you by counsel indicated? What I just read, no, just took pictures as victim didn't appeal to him.
That's what it says in that report.
Right? You've made some note that I can't read at the very bottom of that page. Start why kill or something like that. Would you read that to the jury? Mine is somewhat faded and backed off the bottom of the page.
Yeah, okay. Why kill? I don't know. So many times before, did not find him attractive, but not as attractive. I wanted his head for the temple, never just for skull or temple.
So he didn't kill him for sex. He killed him so he could have a head for the temple. Is that what? I mean, I'm just trying to get an answer here. He apparently, according to the report counsel submitted, did not have sex with him. And you're saying then he decided to kill him. He didn't find him attractive, but decided to kill him because he wanted a head.
From what I can determine from my notes, he killed him, he had sex with him, and he was wanting to keep his head for the temple.
Oh, he did have sex with him.
That's what I get from my notes.
All right, well, would you read that portion of your notes that indicate that?
He refers to the victim cutting open belly, seeing the inside, appearance, intestines, different colors, red, blue, yellow. Surprising to see how many colors there were in the internal organs. I would get sexually excited. And I asked on a 1 to 10 scale, he said a 10, masturbating to orgasm, ejaculated into the insides of the organs. So that indicates to me that that's what he remembered happening.
Of the sex. So he didn't do anything to the body. It was just after he opened the body that he ejaculated. He got aroused and then ejaculated. Is that what is, am I drawing the right?
Could you repeat that again? Just so I'm not agreeing to something I didn't hear.
I'm relying on counsel's report and the police reports. Counsel's report said no sex after death. Isn't that what your report says?
You said this 7 times.
I know. He asked me. I didn't understand the question. Did the report you received say no sex after death from counsel? Is that what the report says?
That's what it says. It still says that. And what I said is I went through the reports and asked him personally. I didn't rely on reports that were generated by the defense.
Is that the point then when he said that he didn't find him attractive, but he wanted to kill him for the skull? In other words, did he kill him for the skull, then decide to slit him open and have the sex? That's what the thrust of my question is. I take it from the note that you put at the bottom, of which the poor copy I get isn't legible and tracks off the page.
The notation is in pencil and is kind of light. That's probably why I didn't copy well.
Isn't that what that says? I didn't find him attractive, so I killed him so I could have his skull?
With all due respect, if there's somebody who's written telling them it's on there, read the whole thing.
Give me a copy of it.
Well, I can give you the best copy. I can't let you read everything you give me. Go up and take a look at it.
Do that.
Doctor, let him go up and read it, please.
Okay.
Oh, then the drugs.
Why kill? Then there's an I and something. I don't know. I don't know. So many times before, did not find him attractive, but not as attractive. Is that what that means? What that reads? Yes. Wanting head for temple. Is that correct?
Yes.
Then what does that read? I can't.
That's never just for skull for temple. That means is that it was for a combination of purposes. One, to get the skull for the temple, and one to engage in necrophilic sexual activity.
And is that what he told you that the second purpose was?
That's what I can determine from my notes.
Because that's what he did. Because he slit it open. Did he provide you the second reason or just tell you what he did? He said one reason was for the skull. Did he say the second reason is, and say it?
I'm a little confused right now.
All right. With respect to the first purpose, he said, number one purpose, wasn't attracted to him, wanted the skull for the temple. That's one of the reasons he killed him.
It's one of the reasons.
Then, but that's not the only reason.
Right.
And my question is, did you ask him what was the other reason?
Yes.
And he told you for sex?
Yes.
And that he expressly told you that, or did he just say, well, this is what I did with the body?
He said it was never just for the skull.
So there were two reasons.
Right.
With respect to the defendant, the deceased Weinberger,
Okay.
do you think he intended to kill Weinberger?
No, I don't.
This is one of the gentlemen that he drilled in the head. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So he was going to forego. His intent was apparently to forego doing anything with the insides. He was going to keep him alive.
This is where he'd gone into the phase of trying to create the zombies. Yes.
And he undertook to make that effort. Is that correct?
That's
with
correct.
Weinberger?
Yes.
And Weinberger, it succeeded the first day at least, didn't it?
It's, well, if you can call the kind of state Mr. Weinberger was in succeeding, he wasn't dead the first day.
And he survived. And when the defendant came back, did he tell you what he did with Mr. Weinberger? He left. Was it to go to work and returned?
I believe so.
At least there's some reason he left and came back in the house and found Mr. Weinberger up, or at least or awake or moving about. Did he have sex with him at that time? Did he indicate to you?
He said that he was alive for 2 days. He was comatose. He went to work, and then we found him dead the next morning.
Did he have sex with him after he died?
Did he dwindle to death? I didn't want him to die. He was the only one who had apparently stayed alive that long after the first injection. He does not say that he had sex with him after he died.
With respect to Joseph Bredehoff, that was the last victim.
Okay?
The reports we received, the police interviews, and the reports from counsel indicate, I quote, sex after death, no, wasn't as attractive. Would you turn to Mr. Bredehoff? Number 17.
Yes.
15 in terms of this proceeding.
Yes. He did indicate that he did not have sex with him after death.
With respect to Mr. Tracy Edwards, you got a police report of their interview with Tracy Edwards. That's the individual whose the incident that precipitated the arrest of the defendant.
Yes.
You received a police report, a multi-page police report about that incident, did you not? An interview of Mr. Edwards?
Yes, I did.
And you also received other information, particularly a transcript of a Phil Donahue show?
It wasn't a transcript, it was the actual tape.
I don't know if you made the comparison. Did you then, if you had it before you, did you see that there were inconsistencies between what he said on the Phil Donahue show and what he said to the police?
I would need to review a copy of the police report.
If you recollect, in terms of the police report, there is no mention of any rocking or chanting by the defendant in the police report, Mr. Edwards' report to the police, but such claim is made on the Phil Donahue show. Does that stir your recollection at all?
It stirs it, and it also stirs it that he said that that's what occurred to me when I spoke to him on phone, on interview.
In terms, he also made a statement on the Donahue show that there were 8 locks on the door. He examined a picture here in the open courtroom and indicated that there were apparently only 2 on the door. Do you recall the assertion about the locks?
I do recall the assertion about the locks, and I do recall reading an additional statement about the locks, which I think is important.
An additional statement?
Yes, it was made regarding the crime scene itself that did indicate that there were multiple locks on the doors.
Several locks, at least 2. Did it say how many?
It said it indicated more than 2.
Did that include the entire apartment, that there were locks on the inside bedroom doors and so on?
I would have to review that, but they do mention a very high security setup with multiple locks inside and outside.
There were locks on, several locks on the front door, 2. There were locks on the door into the bedroom, I believe 2 on that. There was an alarm system. There was a camera, a video camera. That's probably what you're thinking about, that particular report.
I would like to review it. I do have it.
You do have it?
Yes.
Do you wish to check it? Go ahead.
Yes. Okay.
Go ahead.
This is on the handout that offense says second-degree sexual assault and sexual exploitation of a child.
I don't, that's not the same apartment.
It isn't, but this is what the materials are stapled to, and this is how I received them. Page A911501 at the top, Oliver Lacey, and at the bottom, 2472, page 91. Scene investigation. The apartment contains heavy-duty security protection to include multiple locks, a security alarm system, and a video camera. Additional security locks are noted on the inner doors of the apartment.
Now, the inner doors would not be the outer door, would it?
No.
You understand that? Is there mention further about locks on the bedroom doors and a sliding door into the bathroom hallway?
That there is a sliding door to the bathroom?
Into the hallway leading to the bedroom and bathroom. And what I'm saying is there were locks inside. The multiple
Yes.
locks refer to
Okay.
a variety of locks at the dwelling. Is that true?
Okay.
you're not concluding from that there were 8 locks on the front door, or are you?
It doesn't mention any number of locks. It says multiple locks.
All right, on what? Read it again. Read the sentence again.
The apartment contains a heavy security protection to include multiple locks.
And that doesn't say multiple locks on the front door, does it?
No, it doesn't.
It means the scene, there are multiple locks.
But it does add later additional security locks are noted on the inner doors in the apartment, and that's why I assumed that it referred to the outer door.
So you inferred that it meant that it was referring, doesn't say that, but that was your inference, is that
Right,
correct?
because they mentioned inner doors later, and that they had security locks.
There was a picture shown to Mr. Edwards here in open court.
Yes.
With respect to the Mr. Edwards also claimed that he was shown the contents of a barrel when he appeared on the Phil Donahue show, but he made no such statements to the police. Is that your recollection?
Your Honor, I'm going to object. This is militarily irrelevant. When Mr. Edwards said to the police, what Mr. Edwards, unless he relied upon that.
That's you list.
Let me just get my objection. Unless he relied upon that, and it had something to do with forming his opinions based upon his discussion with Tracy Edwards, I think it's immaterial and irrelevant.
You listed Tracy Edwards as one of the Phil Donahue show as one of the records reviewed.
That's correct.
Did you rely on anything you saw on the Phil Donahue show?
I noted the victim giving an account on the Phil Donahue show.
Did you compare that account to the differences between what appeared in the Phil Donahue show and what appears in his statement to the police?
Not because I didn't have a transcript. It wasn't against each other. And I don't have that. I have his collateral interview with me, but I don't have a copy of the police report right in front of me.
I don't have an extra copy of it here. Would you look on there and see if there's anything on there about rocking in it? This was a statement given by Mr. Edwards to the police subsequent to the entry by the police into the apartment building and the apartment particularly of Mr. Donahue, Mr. Dahmer. Is that right?
This is when Edwards was handcuffed on one wrist and approached the officers.
That's right.
Yes.
That's the report. And then he's taken downtown and interviewed and gives a statement about what transpired. And would you look through that statement and see if he says, it goes into some detail about what happened and what transpired. And I'm asking you to scrutinize that to see if it says anything about Dahmer rocking and chanting. I'm sorry, I'm not sure you have the right report. Was it a report?
It's fine.
I'm referring to counsel, I'm referring to section 13G, page 5.
Now, I'm going to state on the record that I object to the question because there has been no foundation laid by any police officer in the city of Milwaukee that he asked Mr. Edwards whether or not Mr. Dahmer was chanting and rocking, and therefore it is inappropriate to ask this witness that. But if it's to save some time, I'm confident that he did not say in any police report that Mr. Dahmer was rocking and chanting.
If it please the court, he has said he's relied on the Phil Donahue show.
Well, just a minute. The way I understand what Mr. Boyle just said is that he's making an objection and then withdrawing it so that he can go ahead and answer it. If that's the case.
I object to the form of the question because there's been no foundation laid that he was asked to wit Mr. Tracy whether or not he was ever asked by a policeman whether Mr. Dahmer was rocking and chanting. And therefore, we're wasting time because I know it's not in that report. And I'll save a lot of time by keeping this witness from having to read something I know that isn't in any of those reports.
Well, the only thing is, Well, you're not one on the witness stand. I'm going to overrule the objection.
It says one officer asked Dahmer if this was some kind of perverted act or if he was a psycho, to which Dahmer replied, "Yes, I am." But it contains nothing about him rocking back and forth.
Did you advance that statement that you did in part as an effort to support the defendant, sir? There was nothing, I asked you no question about what was said by Edwards to a police officer or what an officer said, did I?
I'm going to object to that because that's just to get messed up.
Sustained. Let's.
The issue is there was nothing there that says anything about rocking and chanting, is there?
There's nothing about rocking and chanting.
Yes.
There are other things in both reports, but there's nothing about rocking and chanting.
And he did, however, say that the Dahmer was rocking and chanting on when he was on the field on the show, didn't he?
I don't recall.
But you did you make any reliance at all on what you saw on the Phil Donahue show, Mr. Edwards?
No.
All right, that saves us all a lot of trouble. Thank you. With respect to the temple, the matter of the temple.
Yes.
Was that the key thing that causes you to reach the formal opinion that he has psychotic disorder not otherwise specified?
There are three things.
Mm-hmm.
It's the creation of a temple to serve as a power base to give him powers that he does not otherwise have, the powers of which getting from this kind of gruesome temple is completely bizarre. That is one. The second is actually trying to create a living zombie who would forget his identity and stay with him forever. And that this was a grandiose and bizarre delusion as well that he pursued.
When you say creation, there was in fact no temple created. Is that correct?
There were parts bought for the temple, and there was a plan for the temple. There was bleaching of skulls for the temple, and there was painting of skulls for the temple.
But there was no temple. He put together no temple.
He did not put together a temple that was incomplete at the time of his
He had
arrest.
sufficient heads, didn't he? There were 11 heads recovered. There was 7 skulls, 4 heads that had not been denuded of tissue. He had actually 11, which is one more than he would need for the temple.
So that would fill the requirement for heads. I don't know if he had 2 skeletons that were complete and set up the way he
had
described in his picture.
He had Mr. Miller's skeleton, didn't he?
I don't know that he had it set up as a complete skeleton, sort of holding up the ends of the tables is what it looks like.
The table was there, but do you know what was on the table?
I know that some of the posing of the victims occurred on the table.
At the time of the arrest, do you know what was on the table?
I don't know.
There was a large fish tank on the table.
Okay.
I want you to listen carefully to what the discussion, I can do it in length or hit at the heart of it, between Dr. Dietz, who interviewed the defendant with respect to this temple, and ask you if the response given affects in any way your opinion.
I'm going to object to the form of this, Your Honor. I don't see any way before the witness is called to testify that he can bring in testimony of what somebody else asked to lay a foundation to cross-examine my.
I think that he can formulate a hypothetical question based on information that will later be testified to.
Hypothetical's fine.
Okay, I think that's what he's talking about formulating here.
Doctor, I want you to assume that a very skilled psychiatrist named Park Dietz conducted interviews with the defendant over 3 days in this building, and that during that time, the variety of the entire background of the individual's birth and Mr. Dahmer, and what transpired in connection with the slayings, starting with Mr. Hicks, and an extensive discussion ensued over 3 days between Dr. Dietz and Mr. Dahmer. And one of the subjects discussed during that time was the temple that you referred to. I'm going to give a part of it, which I think is the essence of it. They were talking about this temple being constructed. The question, as I read, question is Dr. Dietz and answer is Mr. Dahmer. I want you to assume that this was said. They're talking about the status of it. Question, you were short money for the chair and the lamp, right? Answer, agrees. In another 6 months, it would have all been set up if I still had the job. Question, What kind of power did you think this would give you? Answer, I don't know. I was just experimenting. It would have been a place that I would have felt comfortable sitting in and trying to get in touch with whatever spiritual powers there might be. Question, did you make any efforts to get in touch with spiritual powers while you were collecting? Answer, not at this point, no. Question, later did you? Answer, no. I would have if I had set this up though. Does that change your opinion at all about that?
No, it doesn't.
In other words, the fact that he speaks of spiritual powers or whatever spiritual powers there might be, whatever spiritual powers there might be, does that sound like a definitive affirmation that he believed there's spiritual powers that are going to help him?
Well, you're talking about a hypothetical case, or you're talking about
I'm talking about a hypothetical case where he responds, whatever spiritual powers.
Well, in a hypothetical case, I would need to know a lot more information than what you're giving me.
So you couldn't answer on that?
No, I couldn't.
Right. Do you know that both Dr. Berlin and Dr. Becker talked about the temple and considered it in terms of possible psychosis and rejected that as evidence of psychosis? Are you aware of that?
Yes.
Are you aware that every other doctor that examined him felt he did not suffer from the psychosis that you said he suffered from? Are you aware of that?
Yes, I am.
That goes back to the time that the psychologist, Dr. Charles Lodel talked with the defendant back on January 5 of 1989. I think you got the copy of Dr. Lodel's report?
Yes.
Would you look to page 4 of that report, just the last paragraph above conclusions? The last paragraph above conclusions on page 4. Starts, although.
Yes.
Does this sentence appear in that report? This was a psychologist to whom the defendant had been referred and whom he saw on January 5, 1989. Various tests were conducted, and he sent this report. Although Mr. Dahmer appears to be a very psychologically problem man, there is no evidence at this time that he is experiencing a disorder such as psychosis. Were you aware of that report, and had you examined it?
Yes, I had.
While DePaul Hospital was attempting to treat the defendant with a drinking problem, he had several visits with a doctor by the name of Dr. Greg Krems. Is that accurate? He is a psychiatrist affiliated with the hospital.
That's correct.
And would you look to the entry of October 13, 1990? It's the entry of October 13, 1990.
Yes, I have it.
And towards the end of that entry, do the following words appear: no evidence of psychotic process. You see that?
Where are you reading?
Towards the end of that entry of October 13, 1990. Towards the end of it. The second to last line of the entry.
Yes, I see that.
No evidence of psychotic process.
I would like to point out that we are reading very small sections that do not give the full flavor. However, they do say that there is no psychotic process. In both cases, they say that the person is seriously ill, needing hospitalization, and they prescribe medications in this case to treat
There's
him.
a big difference between having problems and maybe being in a hospital and being psychotic. Big difference, am I right?
Well, he does diagnose him with a disorder that in some cases is associated with depression. I mean, depression is associated at times with psychosis, and he does give him that diagnosis.
And he speaks as well about his antisocial personality problems. Is that correct? Personality disorder?
No, he diagnoses a mixed personality disorder.
But he describes it as a personality disorder, right?
He describes a mixed personality disorder.
Doctor, I'm not going to go through each of the other, Dr. Rosen's reports, the various doctors. It'll take time. You and I know there is no entry anywhere in those reports that say this man is psychotic. Am I right?
We do know that in Dr. Crowley's report, there is a mention of something that is very much like what Tracy Edwards described as happening in the apartment.
Dr. Smale's report?
No, Dr. Crowley.
All right. Does Dr. Crowley say anything about him being psychotic? He saw Dr. Crowley 3 times. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the entries are short. Is that accurate?
They're short. There's a major entry and there's a progress note. And he also prescribes 2 kinds of medications to treat the defendant.
My question is there anything in Dr. Crowley's report that says this man is psychotic?
He says this. At this point, he feels his whole life is falling apart and feels that he would rather be dead than on the street, and consequently, there is some suicidal potential in the near future. Mr. Dahmer also reports such intense anxiety that he was almost totally immobilized on occasion. He said that his mind would start to race, he would start to sweat, he is unable to think straight, and that he never felt anything like that before. And that is 1 or 2 days before the last murder.
And that is what he is saying to Dr. Crowley.
That's correct.
Is that correct? Has Dr. Crowley said he was psychotic?
May I read what Dr. Crowley says?
Certainly may.
I also told him that if he felt overwhelmed and suicidal and or so disabled by his anxiety that he was unable to do any problem solving, that he should go to the Milwaukee County Mental Health Complex for some inpatient treatment. And finally, despite his history of substance abuse, I will prescribe the anti-anxiety agent lorazepam as well as doxepin for sleep and the depression. So here you have a suicidal patient describing possibly psychotic symptoms, and nothing is done except if you don't feel better in the morning, go to a mental health center for inpatient treatment.
Let me put that to you again, Doctor. Dr. Crowley does not say that he is psychotic.
No, he doesn't.
He says certain manifestations that you choose to interpret as agreeing with you, although no other doctor has agreed with your statement. Of the number that saw him, including your experts, no other doctor has agreed that he's psychotic, have they?
I'm going to object to him yelling at him. Why don't you just ask the question? Objection to the form of the question and the way it's presented with his question.
Doctor,
psychosis is not mentioned diagnostically in any of the reports.
Dr. DeGaudy, and I know you have,
except mine.
I know you haven't seen these witnesses, and I can understand that, but I want you to assume something. I think you were not here in court at the time. Maybe you watched it on television, but a detective, Murphy, gave extensive testimony. And at the close, towards the close, he said in response to questions that he had spent up to 60 hours with Mr. Dahmer. And when he was asked questions about his observations, he responded stating basically, I want you to assume this. To assume that he responded that in those 60 hours of interviews, he observed no delusions, no hallucinations, no incoherence, no racing thoughts, no inability to relate his thoughts to one another, that he did not see him in a stupor, he did not believe he was out of touch with reality in any way. I want you to assume that he was asked such question and made such answer. I want you to assume further that a man named Benning will testify, who was Mr. Dahmer's direct foreman from 1985 when he started at Ambrosia up through, although when it was a 1-to-4 relationship, the foreman to Mr. Dahmer, that foreman relationship continued from 1985 through July of 1991, and that he will be asked the question to which he will say no. Did you see any evidence of delusions, hallucinations, incoherence, Did you ever see him unable to relate his thoughts to one another? Did he ever indicate racing thoughts? Did you ever see him in a stupor? Did you ever see him out of touch with reality in any way? And that he will say no. I want you to assume further the officers that arrested him at the time of the indecent exposure, and at the time, the key investigating officer, and at the time of the second-degree sexual assault, where he was arrested at his job early that next morning, that in response to those same questions, he will make the same answers. I want you to assume that 2 police officers will testify that they came upon a man naked at North 25th and West State Street in May of 1991. And that Mr. Dahmer came on the scene, that there were citizens there, that the fire truck arrived and a police van, that they spoke with Mr. Dahmer about, and he spoke saying that the individual named Conrad Synthesomphone was a friend of his, and that he talked to the officers about that, went back with the officers to his apartment, that is to Mr. Dahmer's apartment. I want you to assume that those officers will testify that they saw at that time no delusions in Mr. Dahmer, no hallucinations, no incoherence, that he appeared able to relate his thoughts to one another, that he didn't give evidence of racing thoughts, that he was not in a stupor, that he was not out of touch with reality in any way. I want you to assume further that 1 or more probation officers that worked with him during a probationary period that stretched over a number of months and involved a number of meetings will be asked the same question. Did you see during those meetings any evidence of delusions, hallucinations, incoherence? Was he unable to relate his thoughts to one another at any time? Did he have racing thoughts? Was he in a stupor? Was he out of touch with reality in any way? I want you to assume in response to each of those questions, first, that Detective Murphy answered no, and that each of those witnesses will, when put those questions will put to them, will answer no, they saw no such evidence. I want you to assume all such testimony will be given. Will that influence your opinion with respect to psychosis in any way?
That will not influence my opinion in any way.
That's all.
I think I got about 10 minutes, and maybe we can finish up there.
Go ahead, Mr. Boyle.
First of all, there was a question asked about Dr. Smale's findings that Mr. Dahmer was all times competent to stand trial. Can you explain the difference between what a psychiatrist or a psychologist is to look at when they're talking about a person's competency to stand trial, as opposed to a psychiatrist or a psychologist making a determination as to the state of mind at the time of the criminal offense?
Yeah, it's a very different kind of examination. The examination as to whether someone is able to come in here and stand trial refers to what their mental functioning is right now. Are they unable to appreciate, are they able to cooperate with attorneys in their defense? And are they able to appreciate the nature of the proceedings? Those tend to be 2 key features in fitness, and it's at this moment. So that could be done with Mr. Dahmer today, and presumably there are assumptions being made, or that is done.
Will you pull the mic a little closer?
Yes.
Is it clear that at the time of the commission of the offense, that the inquiry is to whether or not one was suffering from a mental disease, not whether or not they were competent to stand trial?
That's what is done in a mental and a criminal responsibility.
And a person can be competent to stand trial and still be suffering from a mental disease.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. Now let's talk about this fantasy. How important is it for you to know every single solitary factor concerning the fantasy and how the fantasy is going to be carried out?
Is it possible to phrase it any other way?
Sure. In other words, is it necessary that you know that if a person's fantasy is young males and X, Y, Z, that in order to achieve that fantasy, that they may use a club, a bludgeon, a pill, a gun, a knife? How important is to know the method? if you on that kind of a fantasy?
Well, the method may be important, but more important is why they're doing what they're doing.
Now, Mr. McCann said something about degrees of sexual desires. In any 5 given individuals, the degree of sexual desires can be different, correct? Not everybody has the same degree of sexual desires, right?
No, they don't.
I mean, some people have a low level, and some people have a high level, and some people have medium levels.
Some people have what?
Medium levels.
Medium. Okay, that's fair.
So the fact that Mr. Dahmer had sexual desires towards males may have changed as to the strength of those desires from time to time, correct?
That's correct.
In other words, no one is suggesting, is it, in your business that every day that he walked around?
Just a series of leading questions. It's improper to object to it.
Can you tell us whether or not you are stating as a psychiatrist that his degree of sexual desires from 1978 through 1991 was always constant as far as the strength of those desires?
It was not always constant, and there were conscious efforts to resist those desires, but it didn't last.
Now, there's some question about Mr. Dahmer not picking out people who had automobiles for the reasons that Mr. McCann said. And he used the word that Mr. Dahmer was very cunning. Is there any question about that? He was very cunning, was he not?
Yes.
Mr. McCann said, is the reason you didn't ask that question is because of your inexperience? Do you consider yourself inexperienced?
No, I don't.
How many people have you interviewed since you got into the business of psychology or psychiatry of people who may be suffering from a mental disease or defect?
Objection, repetition.
You've opened up the door. This experience business.
Repetitious question.
I'm concerned about how broad the question is.
Very, very simple.
Mr. Boyle, because you included both psychology and psychiatry. No,
I'll leave it back to psychiatry.
I see 30 to 40 clinical patients on a weekly basis, which may include diagnosis or ongoing treatment. And I've seen hundreds of patients since I've started work as a psychiatrist.
Are you required to ask them questions?
Yes.
On this business of the cars, are you aware of the fact that Mr. Dahmer did get in a car with one of the victims and a friend and got a ride from them to the grandmother's house or towards the grandmother's house?
I don't recall which case that was. I recall reading something about them being in a car.
If Mr. Dahmer's grandmother had not come across Mr. Dahmer and Mr. Flowers, based upon what you have learned and based upon your expertise in the field of psychiatry, do you have an opinion as to whether or not Mr. Flowers would have been killed or not?
Yes, I do.
What is it?
I believe he would have been.
Would have been what?
Would have been killed.
There was a series of time when Mr. McCann brought to your attention that Mr. Dahmer, for a period of about a year and a few months, didn't kill anyone. You know that he was under work release during 9 of those months, did you not? He was in jail.
That's true. And then there was a time when he was at his grandmother's house as well.
But when he was in jail, did you come to learn that he didn't have a place to live other than the jail to which he had to return every day?
Yes.
Now, Doctor, you come to learn there was about 8,500 pages of police reports in this case.
I didn't count each individual one. There are thousands and thousands. You've seen the struggle I've tried to go through to find them, even though I've tried to index them.
Was it clear to you that what we were doing in sending you the data that we also gave copies of to the district attorney was to assist you in you doing your job, correct?
Yes.
Were you ever told by myself or anyone in my office that was in those documents was the absolute fact of the matter?
No.
You were the one who was supposed to do the questioning, correct?
That's why.
Were we ever there to tell you what to ask?
No, you were never with me on any occasion.
Now, there's a question asked about no other doctor has found a psychosis. If I were to tell you that both Dr. Berlin and Dr. Becker considered the impact of the chemical and what it may mean relative to the psychosis and also other matters, but couldn't support it, how remarkably different would that be than you doing the same thing and finding it?
I think that we did independent evaluations and I came to conclusions that I feel are fully confident with and that I supported.
Has anything that Mr. McCann brought to your attention in any way altered the opinions you gave as to Mr. Dahmer's mental disease and the effect of it on each and every time of these homicides?
No, it doesn't.
He asked you a series of questions about all these people like Dr. Lodel and Dr. Crowley and Dr. Rosen and doctors, people at DePaul, et cetera, and so forth. They all talked to Mr. Dahmer and made opinions prior to the time that it was discovered that he had killed 15 human beings, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, is it appropriate for a psychiatrist to be questioned on a given matter concerning his opinion about a person's mental disease at the time of the commission of homicides and to use opinions of other doctors who have not made or rendered an opinion as to the mental disease of the defendant at the time of the commission of the homicides because either they didn't know about him or weren't asked to render that opinion?
That's a very argumentative question, if you please the court.
15.
Would you render an opinion about how a person's necrophilia may have caused them to act if you didn't even know they were a necrophiliac?
You wouldn't have the facts.
We can.
All, like, such as Dr. Greg Krems, who said he was not psychotic, Dr. Lodel, who said he was not psychotic. Obviously, they were speaking of their observations of the man at that time.
As they knew him, that's correct.
And at that time, in fact, he was killing people, wasn't he? When Krems saw him, when Lodel saw him in January 5 of 1989, he had already killed a number of people, had he not?
That's correct.
And when Krems saw him later, he had already killed a number of people, had he not?
That's correct.
And of course, it's proper for you to consider in your overall assessment. You looked at their medical records, gave it such weight as you thought it should give, but you certainly considered that. If they had said he's wild and he's psychotic, you would have considered that, wouldn't you? In other words, you looked at that.
I looked at all. I asked, and I hope I got all of the mental health records.
They did not know that he was killing people, but from what they looked at him, they said he's not psychotic.
They said he's seriously ill. They didn't say he's psychotic.
They said he was not psychotic, didn't they? That's what the terms they used.
That's correct.
And
without knowing the facts.
Well, he was in fact killing at the time, and they were examining him. They were conducting examination. And it's perfectly proper for you to consider that, is it not? What their opinions were at the time.
I considered all the mental health input, school records, anything I could find.
When I talked to you about the period, the 14-month period between the slaying of Sears and the slaying of the next gentleman, I pointed out in my questions that he had been serving time in the release facility, did I not, in the jail?
I believe you did.
Yes, and you know, of course, when a man is released to go to work, if he chooses, if he feels that that's what he decides to do, he can instead go out at midnight instead of going to work. He can go out to a park or out to a shopping center or a tavern and pick up someone, take him to a hotel, kill him, and do what he wants with the body, if that's what he chooses to do, can't he?
Anything's possible.
Sure. That's it.
You may step down, doctor. Thank you.
You.
We'll, as far as the jury is concerned, we at this point will break for the evening. We'll reconvene at 8:30 tomorrow morning. However, there is a matter that has to be heard concerning this case, and therefore I ask counsel to remain.
Very well, in the morning, I'm going to announce to the court that I rest, but I'll just look through my notes before.
Court's in recess.
All right.